Hey there, it's Clara from AcuPro Academy, and today's video made easy is all on the spleen system in Chinese medicine. This is all on the inquiry method of TCM diagnosis. So, as you know, there is no wrong treatment in Chinese medicine, only the wrong diagnosis. So, this one is specifically on the spleen system. I have separated the spleen and the stomach and the large intestine, even though they are in the digestive system, because otherwise it'd be too long of a video. But you can look at all the other inquiry methods for like the kidney and the lung and the heart, etc. on my YouTube channel. And of course, I've got tons and tons of resources on my website, AcuProAcademy.com, which has tons of courses, video, PDF, treatment protocols, and more. Check it out. Let me know how you like it. I'm always there to answer questions. In the meantime, let's start it up with the spleen system inquiry method of TCM diagnosis. So before we start with talking about what we do to form a diagnosis, we need to go back to foundation. I like to do that with my students when I'm in school and I teach. I just want to remind everybody, ourselves, to get ready for understanding the diagnosis of the spleen system in Chinese medicine. And in order to do this, like my teachers would say, if you can't understand something in Chinese medicine, go back to foundation. So the foundation of spleen function in Chinese medicine, main function, of course, is to govern digestion of nutrients into energy, right? It's in charge of transporting and transforming the food and turning into energy so we can function during the day. It controls muscles. That's great to know that we need to eat good food to replenish when we break down our muscle fibers by working out and building lactic acid. You need to replenish with food, which the spleen is in charge of transporting good nutrients to repair the muscle. It's also preventing water retention. So the spleen is definitely going to be one of the organ system in TCM that is in charge of preventing water retention. The kidney also does this, the lung also, and the sanjiao, or the triple burner, also is in charge. So all those four systems are going to be in charge of preventing water retention. Spleen specifically, water retention on the belly and the digestive system. Spleen also produces blood. So we ingest nutrients, let's say iron and all the minerals that you need to form blood. You need to eat that in order to produce blood. So spleen is in charge of producing blood from nutrients, but it's also in charge of preventing hemorrhage. One of the functions of spleen is to keep blood within the blood vessels, which means preventing bleeding or hemorrhage, right? So if there's bleeding issue, that could be also a spleen problem. It's in charge of keeping all organs from prolapsing. So it has tendency to raise qi and keep all the organs in place so they don't fall. So if there's organ prolapse, we have to look at spleen, and we'll look at this coming up in this video. It's in charge of fluids, and the fluid part of spleen is saliva. So if there's too much saliva or not enough, there's dry mouth, that's a spleen stomach function. So we'll look at it. If there's too much saliva, that's usually excess dampness in the spleen. If there's dry mouth, that's often a problem with stomach yin deficiency. So the two are kind of related. Stomach and spleen are in charge of digestion, and digestion starts in the mouth. It's also opening into the mouth, right? Because digestion starts in the mouth and manifests on the lips. What does that mean? It means that the beginning of digestion starts in the mouth. If there's mouth issue, usually that's a problem with spleen and or stomach. And the lips also reflects an observation. We look at the lips and see if they reflect the digestive system, specifically spleen and stomach. If we have pale lips, dry lips, cracked lips, or purple lips, etc. Right? So if you want to know more about lips and observation, I have a whole video on observation on my YouTube channel and more blog posts on my website. So you can look that into more details. This is more about inquiry, not observation per se. And the last but not least, the spleen is in charge of housing clear thinking. So when we eat really good food and good nutrients, those nutrients are going to go to our brain and allow us to think clearly and to feel like we are able to focus, to concentrate, and we don't feel foggy or scattered right? That makes sense? So that's the spleen function. Let's start up with the inquiry. So one of the basic TCM pattern with the spleen is a spleen Qi deficiency. And that's very, very common in TCM, and it's very common in the Western world. We see a lot of people with spleen Qi deficiency. So the questions that I ask to see if the person has this pattern is, are you fatigued, right? What's your energy level? Mental and physical. So the spleen is in charge of bringing nutrients to the brain for mental energy and nutrients to the body for the muscle for physical energy. So sometimes people are just fatigued physically, sometimes it's mentally, and sometimes it's both, right? That's very common when people are exhausted. So that gives us an idea that there's a spleen Qi deficiency. Or if people say, I sleep really well, but I still can't get up in the morning. It's so hard. I hate morning. I hate to get up, right? So they sleep 8 hours and they still can't get up. Morning time is spleen and stomach time. So that's a spleen deficiency. Or if someone wants to sleep all the time, they're really tired all the time and they're just exhausted. So someone that has hypothyroidism, for example, usually the thyroid is under functioning and so they're always tired and they want to sleep all the time. They could fall asleep at any time and nap all day. That is a spleen Qi deficiency. Chronically exhausted. So a lot of time when people have adrenal fatigue in the Western sense, most of my students think that's a kidney deficiency. Not at the beginning. When chronic fatigue sits in, it's a spleen Qi deficiency, which can turn into a spleen sinking or spleen Qi sinking, where you're exhausted. Eventually, if that's for years, that will age us and that will deplete our essence. And yes, that's going to become a TCM kidney deficiency. But at the beginning, it's always the spleen that's deficient. So here's a very, very easy thing to see is like I see that in students specifically, right? Spleen Qi deficiency, it's very common in people that are overwhelmed, overworked mentally, students that are in school studying and then have to study after and they're exhausted. So usually they're fatigue, loose stools because the spleen is not able to transport and transform the nutrients, so they go right through. Feeling weak, having food sensitivities, so not necessarily allergies, so not anaphylactic like peanuts, but more sensitivities, poor digestion or weak digestion. I think that's the best word for it. Poor appetite. Now, this poor appetite with spleen Qi deficiency doesn't mean that the person is not hungry at all. It just means that they have no hunger in the morning, but then they'll be hungry by midday and then maybe very hungry at night. So they eat sporadically and they're not hungry in the morning. So that's a poor appetite specifically in the morning. Have tendency to have nausea with certain food, not always. This is not always a symptom that's there, but definitely bloating for sure after meals. So this person eats and after meals they're bloated, right? There's usually pale face, pale lips, pale tongue, right? So that is the payoff from the spleen Qi deficiency. They worry a lot and they definitely overthink a lot. So good food for people that are spleen Qi deficient is to have what I call baby food or food that is already well cooked so it feels like it's mushy and it's easy to digest. So like carrots that are cooked, we're talking about all cooked food, sweet potatoes, anything that's orange and yellow is very good for the spleen, specifically when it's cooked. Ginger, peas, pumpkins, cinnamon, squash, right? You could see this is all very soft food. Eggs, salmon, all this is, again, yellow and orange, and it's very soft and easy to digest, right? So that's the best thing for spleen Qi deficiency. And very important is to avoid cold, raw food because that makes the spleen worse or weaker or more deficient. Then let's talk about appetite with the spleen system. This is always very interesting too when you ask question about appetite. So if someone has no appetite at all, they're spleen Qi deficient. If they're not hungry in the morning, they're spleen Qi deficient. But if they have no appetite at all, so I want you guys to see the difference between those two because that's the same answer, right? If it's only in the morning, it's a spleen Qi deficiency. If it's no appetite at all, it's a spleen Qi deficiency leading to blood deficiency. So the spleen is not able to produce blood, so it leads to blood deficiency. So someone that never is hungry and has to force themselves to eat is a spleen Qi deficiency with blood deficiency. So that's the difference right there. If someone is craving sweets, often, all the time, at PMS, depending, that's a spleen Qi deficiency with dampness. And so what I think is interesting is spleen Qi deficiency with dampness is the chicken of the egg, or the egg, right? Which one came first? The dampness, which created spleen Qi deficiency, or the spleen Qi deficiency, which created the dampness because it wasn't able to transform and transport the water because it's in charge of water metabolism, right? So this is interesting. So we have to look at this in a perspective of if the person is craving sweets, we have to strengthen the spleen and eliminate the dampness. And if someone is constantly hungry, all the time, they want to eat everything in the kitchen sink, that's usually a stomach heat. So I put it in there, even though we haven't talked about the stomach yet, and that's a different video. I wanted you to see that if you're constantly hungry, that's like you're feeding the fire, right? You need to put more logs and the fire keeps going, and the more you eat, the more you're hungry. So that's usually a stomach heat. All right? Hopefully that helps. Something that, again, I want to really emphasize is dampness. Dampness is a huge part of spleen because it is in charge of water metabolism and it gets affected by damp and by cold. So spleen hates the cold and hates the damp, which is the opposite of stomach, which hates the dry and hates the heat, right? So they're very yin and yang together as an entity. So dampness creates issues in the body, such as bloating, specifically when it's due to spleen Qi deficiency or excess dampness. So bloating, specifically after meal. Yeast infection or having a lot of excess vaginal discharge is a dampness. Having loose stools or diarrhea chronically, that's dampness. Having swelling anywhere in the body, that's edema, that's dampness. Having excess mucus in the nose, right? That's excess dampness, or excess mucus discharge from the skin, or coughing mucus, right? And we're having white mucus, and that's usually dampness. So what's important with dampness is spleen 9 in acupuncture is the best point for dampness, but diet is a very important, right? So diet creating dampness is mucus forming food like sugar, processed food, greasy food, and dairy. Those things are really going to create more damp. So we need to avoid dairy, greasy food, processed food when there is a lot of dampness, and increase food that is more drying, like lemon, astringent food, bitter food, and sour food. Okay? Like dandelion, like asparagus, very good for excess dampness. So I wanted to go through this. Now let's look at the pattern of the spleen. The most common one, we've seen it, we looked at it, which is spleen Qi deficiency. The poor appetite, again, is more in the morning, right? Unless there's blood deficiency as well, and then that's all day. Bloating after meal, loose stool, fatigue, pale, weak limbs, really pale and weak pulse, right? So pale tongue and weak pulse, sorry. So we talked about this, so that's easy. The next stage is often with spleen Qi deficiency, the next stage is to go into spleen Yang deficiency. And spleen Yang deficiency resembles spleen Qi deficiency with Yang symptoms. So the same symptoms are poor appetite. The person does not like cold food. They do not like raw food. They want soups and teas and things that are warm. They're definitely bloating after meal. They're fatigued. They're pale. They have loose stools, even maybe diarrhea, right? But on top of it, they have cold body and limbs. They feel cold all the time. They really wanted to curl in because they're always cold. They also have edema, so swelling in the body. The pulse is usually deep because there's no fire, no yang, and it's weak and slow. And the tongue is pale, swollen with a wet coat, and often teeth marks on the side of the tongue. Spleen Qi sinking. So from spleen Qi deficiency, sometimes instead of going towards the next one, which is spleen Yang deficiency, the body will go towards spleen Qi deficiency, and that's the function of spleen not able to raise or keep the organs in place. So the first thing is you could have bearing down sensation in the abdominal region, prolapse of any organs, frequent urination, specifically if the bladder is prolapsing, of course. Varicose vein is also a spleen Qi sinking. Loose stool, fatigue, because of course, again, poor appetite, this is a spleen Qi deficiency, and then to the next level. The person would be much more fatigued in this one than in the basic spleen Qi deficiency. So they'd be very exhausted, like they feel like they're dragging their feet, right? They just can't even get out of bed. So that's a really, really fatigue. The pulse is weak, very thin, and the tongue is very pale. spleen not controlling blood within the blood vessel, which means that's the function of spleen not able to do this. So we're going to have hemorrhage or bleeding. And so it could be blood in the urine, in the stools. We could have heavy flooding menstruation, bleeding gums, or bleeding on the skin. So underneath the skin, like purpurized blood spot underneath the skin. So any abnormal bleeding, chronic, heavy bleeding, comes from the spleen not controlling blood if the person is fatigued and they don't feel hot. The other bleeding, chronic bleeding, is blood that is affected by heat or heat in the blood, and that person would have heavy abnormal bleeding, but they would feel really hot and not fatigue. Okay, those are the two ways we can bleed in TCM perspective for diagnosis. So this one is fatigue, poor appetite, and abnormal bleeding. So the pulse would be thin and weak, of course, and the tongue is pale because the spleen is weak and deficient. So as you can see, the spleen has tendency to be weak and towards deficiency, right? Having said that, there is a little bit of excess, which could be from the dampness. So again, which one came first? Dampness created spleen Qi deficiency if we eat a lot of damp food, which depletes our digestive system, or there was spleen Qi deficiency, which wasn't able to transform and transport and metabolize the water, and now there is dampness. So the person has the spleen Qi deficiency symptoms like poor appetite, specifically in the morning, loose stools, fatigue, right? That's just the same, plus the dampness. So it's not boating, although boating is on the water, so I guess that would be it. I forgot an L in there, so it's bloating, not boating. At least we can laugh about this. The French in me. Anyway, so it's bloating, specifically after meals, heavy limbs and heavy head. So feeling foggy in the head, feeling heavy limbs, that's the dampness, right? The heavy limbs, the foggy head, the bloating, that's the dampness. And then maybe for some people, there'll be nausea on a constant basis, or feeling stuffed in the stomach region, feeling like uncomfortable sensation in the epigastrium or stomach region. The pulse is slippery, that's the dampness, and it's weak, that's the Qi deficiency, right? The tongue is pale or pink, depending on how much Qi deficiency there is, and there is a white greasy coat. The greasy coat is the dampness. Make sense? Okay, and the last one, that's a typical excess. But I have to say, even though it's called cold damp in the spleen, which would be excess cold and excess damp in the spleen, there is an underlying spleen Qi deficiency in there as well, which shows with a slow pulse, that's the cold, but a fatigue. But the fatigue is also coming from the damp. Damp is very dragging. It's very heavy. So it makes us fatigue, right? But there's a slight spleen Qi deficiency in there. So the loose stools is the dampness, the heavy head, the heavy limbs again, is the dampness. The sweet taste in the mouth is a dampness, right? The person probably craves sweets as well. The person is not thirsty, that's the cold. When we feel cold, we're not thirsty, okay? Because you're thirsty when you're hot, right? Makes sense. Your body knows intuitively what you need to have. The cold damp in the spleen mostly is going to show us excess vaginal discharge that is white and sticky. So the white is cold, the sticky is damp. There may be a cold stomach, meaning that cold food makes the person feel more bloated and uncomfortable or nauseated. So they need warm food, right? But the main symptoms here is going to be excess vaginal discharge. That's going to show, plus the heaviness, right? So the pulse is slippery, which is damp, and slow, which is cold. And then the tongue coating is sticky or greasy, and thick and white, that's the cold coming, right? Sorry, not coming. That's the cold showing, and the sticky is the greasy from the dampness, right? Sticky, greasy, same kind of idea from the dampness. So I hope that made sense to you, and you enjoyed this quick, made easy video on the inquiry for the TCM spleen. Don't forget that I'm on Facebook. You can follow me there. I post every single day at 6 p.m. Totally my creations. Follow me on Instagram if you want to as well. Connect with me. Send me some DMs. I love to hear from you guys. And of course, subscribe to my channel if you want more videos, and check them all out. I have tons and tons of information on my website, AcuProAcademy.com. I hope you enjoy all the content that I create and post online for you guys. Have a fantastic day, and no matter what, keep rocking it using TCM.